I've been in this chair a number of times, and always I've told a story, and I'll tell a story tonight. And sometimes I've prefaced the stories by talking about how important storytelling is in our life. Sometimes I've talked about how story lands in our body in a different way than fact or statements. Sometimes I've talked about how the cosmos and nature herself communicates to us through story, from the first leaf in the spring to the last falling leaf in the fall. The nature and the cosmos themselves are speaking to us in story. And sometimes I talk about how difficult it is for us as humans when we lose the place within our own story, within the story of nature, and how lost we feel and ungrounded we feel. But I realize I've never talked about the connection between our storytelling and archetypes and the practice of yin yoga itself. I've never really spoken about why in our practice of yin yoga we talk so much about story and so much about archetype and metaphor. And so I'd like to share a little bit of that with you tonight. For a number of years, I taught yin yoga teacher trainings. And after a number of years, one of the institutes I was teaching for asked me to do an advanced yin yoga training. And I agreed, but I began to think, what does that mean to me? It sounds very simple, but what does it mean to me to advance as a yin yoga teacher? And I thought about, well, we could talk about more anatomy. We could talk about the chakra system. We could talk about energy. We could talk about many things that are interesting and important. But that wasn't where our practice was leading us. As we put ourselves into these postures, we became more and more fascinated by what was happening in those quiet times within the posture itself. And as we put ourselves in these postures, we began to hear the body speak to us as we held the postures and listened. We began to hear the body speak to us in ways that we had not been able to hear before. We began to hear beneath the screams and the screeching of attachment and judgment. There was a more subtle voice, a quieter voice, a voice trying to tell us the stories. Trying to tell us the stories of the wisdom and experience that we saw was not just held in the mind, but was held in every cell of the body. And we knew that we had to find a way to listen to that, to those stories, because just like nature, our body speaks to us through story, through metaphor, through archetype. And we had to learn to listen to those stories. And we knew we had to listen to them not in a way that we were trying to get something or understand something or be told something or be directed in some way. We had to begin to listen to these stories in a different way. We had to begin to listen like a child listens to a story, with an open heart and a childlike wonder. And we could see that only when we opened to this possibility of childlike wonder, with the acceptance and the willingness to listen to the stories of our bodies, did our bodies feel safe enough to begin to whisper these stories, the stories of trauma, of healing, of joy, of sadness. They're all held in the cells of the body. And we found that when we put ourselves in these postures, the body began to speak through the posture in that quiet whisper. And this isn't just about yin yoga, of course. It's about every relationship we have in our life. Can we listen to ourselves? Can we listen to nature? Can we listen to each other with that openness and acceptance, with that open heart and that childlike wonder? And that's the path that our yoga has led us to. Of course, it happens in every practice and every relationship. But that's That's why we spend so much time trying to understand ourselves and nature through the stories that are actually unfolding for us. But now I want to tell you a story. And it's a story about generosity. And I was very fortunate to spend part of the winter in Bali in Indonesia. And what I saw very quickly was how people smiled at each other, how they smiled at me. And I felt, of course, how that smile that they were giving me changed the way I felt, how I began to smile back at them, and how I began to feel more joy and happiness. And I began to see into the culture how for that culture, joy is a precious gift, but it's a precious gift that needs to be shared. And they share it through that beautiful smile, through their beautiful kindness. And I think it's such a wonderful place for me to speak of this, because for me, as I drive in the driveway here for the first time every time, I'm greeted by an angel who smiles at me, and all of a sudden, the sun comes out again. I feel at home. I feel happy. And I realize for me, Yogaville is a place where people have found a way to access their own joy, but not ever forgetting that the gift of that joy is the possibility of giving it to another, even if it's just with a smile. And now I want to tell you the story of the old grass cutter. It's a very complex story and a very simple story as well. And it's a story about generosity. Once upon a time, long ago, there was an old man who lived in a small hut on the edge of a jungle. And the old man was a grass cutter. Every day he went into the field and he cut fresh, sweet grass to take to the village to feed the cows and the horses and the sheep and the goats. And he got paid a few pennies every day. But he was a very frugal man, so he saved part of every day's wages. And he put them in a jar in the corner. And he worked year after year. But one day he began to wonder, I wonder how much money I have in that jar in the corner. So he went and looked, and he was astonished by how much he had saved over the years. And he looked at it, and he pulled on his beard, and he rubbed his head, and he thought, well, I don't need anything. I'm perfectly happy. I don't want anything I don't have. But I don't want this money to just sit in that pot unused. So he took the money into the village, and he went to the jewelry store, and he bought a beautiful gold bracelet. And he went to his friend, the traveling merchant, and he said to the merchant, tell me, who is the kindest and most virtuous woman in the whole land? And the merchant said immediately, why, it's the princess of the West. And the grass cutter said, well, next time you go to the West, would you give this bracelet to the princess? And don't tell her who it's from. Just tell her that it's from someone who admires kindness and virtue. And sooner or later, the merchant ended up in the West, and he gave the princess the beautiful gold bracelet. And she was very touched. And she sent back with the merchant 3 bolts of beautiful cloth. And the merchant took them back to the grass cutter. And the grass cutter sighed and rubbed his head and he stroked his beard and he said, who is the most kind and virtuous man in the whole land? And the merchant said, why, that would be the prince of the East. And the grass cutter said, well, next time you're in the East, would you give these bolts of cloth to the prince? I'm sure he can use them more than I can. But don't tell him who they're from. Just tell him it's from someone who admires kindness and virtue. And sure enough, sooner or later, the merchant ended up in the east, and he gave the prince these bolts of cloth. And the prince was touched. He wanted to give something back. So he had 12 thoroughbred horses brought, and the merchant took the horses back to the grass cutter. And the grass cutter, again, said, well, I'll tell you, why don't you keep 2 of those horses and take the rest to the princess of the east when you see her next. And the merchant said, fine, and sure enough, he did. And he arrived at the princess of the east and gave her these beautiful thoroughbred horses. And she didn't know what to do. So she went to her father, the king, and she said, Father, look at the gift I got. What do I do? And the king said, oh, there's only one thing to do. You have to give back such a magnificent gift that you'll never hear from him again. So the princess ordered 20 mules loaded with silver and sent them with the merchant back to the grass cutter. Well, the grass cutter didn't have to think twice. He said, okay, when you go east again, will you take these mules, these donkeys with all this silver to the prince, but keep a couple for yourself. And the merchant did. And he gave these beautiful, these mules full of silver to the prince of the east. And the prince of the east was a little disturbed, but he didn't want to be outdone. So he ordered 20 camels and 20 elephants to be loaded with precious gifts, and he sent them back to the grass cutter. Well, the grass cutter again said, okay, next time you go east, would you please take these to the princess? Keep some yourself, but take the rest to the princess, which he did. And the princess looked at it, and she didn't know what to do, and she ran to her father, and her father said, I know you have a suitor. He wants to marry you, and to tell you the truth, I don't have any objection. And so they asked the merchant, please take us to meet this wonderful person who's been giving us all these gifts. Well, the merchant was kind of alarmed because he thought, well, if I take the king and he meets this old man in a hut, he's going to be angry. And the one thing you don't want is an angry king. So but he couldn't disobey the king, so they started back towards the grass cutter's hut. Well, the night before they reached the grass cutter's hut, the merchant ran off in the night to meet the grass cutter, and he told the grass cutter all about what was happening. And the two of them sat there lamenting because they were afraid when the king got there was going to be big trouble. But they couldn't think of any solution, so the merchant went back to the camp of the king. And the grass cutter sat on the edge of a cliff, and he was in despair. He thought, well, I'll just throw myself over the cliff. There's no use waiting till morning because it's going to be a disaster. But just then, gently rising up the cliffside were these 2 glowing angelic beings. These 2 angels appeared. And the angels asked him, what is wrong? And he told them. And without a second thought, one angel placed her hand on the grass cutter, and his garments became beautiful, and his inner beauty too. But his garments became beautiful. And the other angel waved her hand, and the little hut turned into a beautiful palace. And the king wandered around in the palace finally to fall asleep. The angels disappeared. And the next morning, the grass cutter was awoken by the blaring of trumpets and the stamping of horses' hooves. And sure enough, the king, the queen, and the princess had arrived. Well, the king got off his horse, and as soon as he saw the old man dressed in the splendor and the beautiful palace, he said, I understand you'd like to marry my daughter, and I want to say I don't have any objection. And the grass cutter just smiled. He said, oh, I'm way too old for your daughter, but I think I know just the right person. So we asked the merchant to go to the east and to bring the prince back. And sure enough, when the prince and princess saw each other, they fell deeply in love, and they were married the very next day. And for the next weeks, they celebrated in the palace. But soon it was time to leave. And so the king, with his 1,000 horsemen and the banners and the bugles and trumpets, and the queen and the princess and the prince all rode off. But they stopped at the top of the hill and turned to wave goodbye. And the grass cutter, standing on the steps of his new house, waved goodbye, holding a sheaf of fresh, sweet grass that he had cut that very morning. The end. And I want to leave you with Hafiz, a poem by Hafiz about this same thing. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what can happen with a love like that. It can light the whole world. Thank you.